The silent wait behind the smooth morning sun peeked over the horizon, casting a golden glow across the vibrant chaos of New Delhi. The honking horns, the scent of brewing chai, and the rhythmic chatter of shopkeepers filled the air. But somewhere, beyond the clamor of the waking city, behind the thick stone walls of a secure compound, a man sat alone at a long oak table. His shoulders were slightly hunched, his eyes scanning reports filled with numbers, projections, and policy details. The world saw him as India's unshakable leader, the man with unmatched energy and unwavering resolve. But in this quiet moment, Narendra Modi looked tired, the kind of tired that no rest could fix. For weeks, Modi ji had traveled nonstop across states, attending countless meetings, negotiating with international leaders, and fielding pressure from every angle imaginable. He had smiled through ceremonies, inspired crowds with speeches, and nodded firmly in cabinet briefings. But beneath that composed exterior, there was something that even his closest advisors had started to notice. His silence had grown heavier, his gaze more distant. And on this particular morning, in that quiet conference room of the Prime Minister's residence, he sat staring at a single sheet of paper. It was a list of upcoming events, a new development summit, a global digital economy forum, an II conference. Each entry seemed to carry the weight of a mountain. And on the top of that list, written in bold, was a name that sparked something in him. Sundar Pichai. Miles away. In California, Sundar Pichai stood at his kitchen window sipping tea. He'd been in deep thought since he received the official invitation to the India Digital Renaissance Summit, a new initiative meant to bridge global tech innovation with India's emerging youth. He was honored, of course. Any opportunity to return to his homeland and contribute to its future filled him with gratitude. But something in the letter had caught his attention. It wasn't just the formal tone or the tight schedule. It was the short handwritten note at the bottom. Your presence will mean more than you realize. There was no signature, but Sundar knew who had written it. The penmanship was too familiar. Over the years, he and Modi ji had shared several conversations. Their interactions were mostly formal, occasionally warm, but never deeply personal. Still, Sundar remembered one evening in particular when they'd spoken quietly after a public event. Modi ji had briefly opened up about the loneliness that came with leadership. It wasn't a complaint, just a passing comment like a whisper escaping before the guard came back up. Sundar hadn't forgotten it. A week later, Sundar landed in Delhi. As he stepped out of the airport, he was greeted by a wall of humidity, flashing cameras, and an entourage of security and media. But he waved humbly, greeted the journalists with a soft smile, and slipped into a black SUV that took him through the city he once called home. His driver, Rajiv, a cheerful man with kind eyes, kept stealing glances through the rearview mirror. Sir, he said hesitantly, it's an honor to drive you. My son studies computer science ... because of you. Sundar chuckled softly, genuinely moved. Then tell him to keep going. India needs more dreamers. Rajiv's eyes lit up as the car pulled into the gates of the Prime Minister's residence. Sundar noticed something unusual. The guards weren't as alert as usual. The mood felt quieter, heavier. And when he stepped out and walked into the hallway, he was surprised to be led not to the main office or ceremonial room, but to a private garden at the back of the estate. There, sitting alone on a stone bench beneath a neem tree, was Modi ji. He wasn't in his usual crisp kurta. Instead, he wore a simple cotton shawl draped over his shoulder, and in his hand was a small copper cup of tea. His eyes were closed, his face calm. But there was something about the way his fingers gripped the cup that told Sundar he wasn't at peace. Sundar approached slowly. Namaste, Modi ji. Modi ji opened his eyes and smiled faintly. Sundar. You always walk like you don't want to disturb the earth. Some places deserve that kind of respect, Sundar replied. His voice warmed. There was a pause as both men sat, silence hanging comfortably between them for a moment. How are you really doing? Sundar finally asked, watching Modi ji closely. The Prime Minister didn't answer right away. He looked out across the garden, where a few birds hopped between branches, the air thick with the scent of jasmine. People think strength is about speaking louder, Modi said quietly, but sometimes silence is heavier than any speech. Sundar listened, giving him space. These days, Modi continued, I feel like I'm speaking to the world but forgetting how to hear my own thoughts. Every day is a battle, not just of politics, but of spirit. I wonder sometimes if I'm still serving with my heart or just surviving with my image. The confession landed like a stone in the quiet air. Sundar felt a wave of compassion rise in him. You're human, Sundar said softly, but no one lets you be one. Modi turned to look at him, his expression more vulnerable than Sundar had ever seen. And you? Modi asked. You lead? An empire of your own. Tell me ... How do you find peace in the chaos? Sundar thought for a long moment before answering. I remember who I was before I had titles. Before I had responsibilities. Sometimes I just ... shut off everything. All. The noise, and return to the things that ground me. Modi nodded slowly, as if trying to remember what his own grounding moments used to be. When was the last time you were just Narendra? Sundar asked. That question hung between them like an ancient bell, still ringing in the distance. Later, that evening, during the official summit briefing, Sundar noticed Modi ji sitting at the head of the table, listening, nodding, but his energy seemed like a flickering candle. He wasn't disengaged, he was just ... elsewhere. And Sundar couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. The next morning, Sundar did something unplanned. He called off his media interviews, paused the schedule his assistants had mapped out for the week, and instead asked for a private meeting with Modi. But what he did next wasn't what anyone expected. He didn't show up in a suit. He didn't arrive with folders or slides. He came dressed in plain linen trousers, a soft blue shirt, and a canvas bag over his shoulder. He entered the residence and asked to speak with Modi ji, not in his office, but somewhere personal. Take Emmy to the room where he keeps his old books, Sundar said to one of the aides. The aide blinked, confused. Sir ... That's a storage space. No one goes there. Today we will, Sundar replied. What happened in that room would begin a journey neither man had anticipated. A journey not of politics or business, but of healing, rediscovery, and quiet rebellion against the weight of public perfection. And just as the door to that forgotten room creaked open, and Sundar stepped inside, a dusty book fell from a shelf. It landed with a soft thud. Modi ji picked it up slowly, stared at the cover, and his eyes widened. This ... He whispered, this was my father's. But before Sundar could ask anything more, Modi ji turned pale. His hand trembled, and then he collapsed. The burden behind the false air in the storage room shifted instantly. What had been a nostalgic, quiet space filled with the scent of old paper and sandalwood polish now transformed into a scene of panic. Sundar rushed forward, catching Modi ji just before he could hit the ground. The Prime Minister's eyes were fluttering, his breathing shallow, and the copper tone of his skin had gone ashen. Sundar gently lowered him to the floor, removing the shawl wrapped tightly around his shoulder and placing it beneath his head. Someone get help. Sundar called out, but his voice didn't carry like it usually did. It cracked with emotion. It wasn't the panic of a CEO, it was the concern of a son watching his father fall. Two aides who had followed from a distance came running in. Within seconds, the residence's medical staff were alerted. A physician, small and wiry but sharp-eyed, hurried in with a portable kit. Sundar stepped back, allowing them space, but his mind was racing. How long has he been like this? Sundar asked one of the aides as they hooked Modi ji up to a blood pressure monitor. The aide hesitated. Sir ... He hasn't been sleeping, barely eating. He's been working 16, sometimes 18 hours a day, but he never complains. We didn't think ... Because he didn't let you think, Sundar finished grimly. Because he's too proud to let anyone see him as weak. The aide looked down, ashamed. Within 20 minutes, Modi Ji was resting in a private room under strict observation. The physician assured Sundar it wasn't a heart attack, but it was close. A severe drop in blood pressure, likely caused by exhaustion, dehydration, and stress. The diagnosis was simple. But the truth was heavier than any prescription could fix. Later that afternoon, after the summit events had been postponed quietly and Modi Ji stabilized, Sundar sat alone on the veranda just outside the room. He was staring at the sky, a soft breeze brushing past the neem trees. The book that had triggered everything still rested in his lap. Its cover was worn, the binding loose. The title was handwritten in faded ink lessons. My father taught me that. It wasn't a published book. It was a personal journal, and inside were pages filled with scrawled thoughts, poems, and life advice from Modi Ji's father. A humble tea vendor from Vadnar. Sundar opened to a random page. A line caught his eye. Remember, son, power is not in being followed. It is in knowing when to walk alone. He closed the journal, holding it tightly. That evening, when Modi Ji awoke, he found Sundar still sitting by his bedside. You didn't have to stay? Modi whispered. But I did, Sundar replied. Because someone had to remind you that you're not alone. Modi smiled faintly, though his eyes were still weary. You're not just here for a summit, are you? He asked. Sundar shook his head. I came because of that note. Because I saw something between the lines. I didn't know what it was, but now, I understand. Modi turned away, staring at the ceiling. I used to have moments where I could disappear, take a walk in the village, sit under a tree, write letters I never sent. Now, every move I make is watched, calculated, analyzed. They say I lead a nation, but some days I don't even know if I lead my own thoughts. His voice broke at the end, just barely. Sundar leaned forward, his voice gentle. You lead more than a nation. You lead hearts. But you can't pour from an empty vessel. You need to heal. The Prime Minister chuckled dryly. You sound like my mother. Sundar smiled. Mothers are always right. The room fell silent again, this time not out of tension, but understanding. Outside, the world continued its usual rhythm. Leaders called. Reporters speculated. Schedules were shifted. Analysts puzzled over the delays. But inside that quiet room, something far more important was happening. An awakening over the next few days, Sundar made an unusual decision. He cleared his schedule completely. No press, no appearances. Instead, he spent time with Modi Ji talking, listening, and rediscovering forgotten parts of the man the world had put on a pedestal one afternoon. Sundar arrived carrying a large flat box. Inside was a simple wooden board with hand-carved pieces, a chess set he had bought during his first year at Aikargar. He placed it on the table in Modi Ji's room. You play? Sundar asked. Modi raised an eyebrow. I used to. Haven't in years. Then let's start again. The games were slow, methodical, filled with long pauses and unexpected laughter. But they weren't just games. They were bridges. And each move was a way of reconnecting with a self. Both of them had forgotten Sundar with his roots, and Modi with his piece. One evening after a particularly intense game, Sundar asked quietly, when was the last time you went somewhere without being seen? Modi Ji thought for a moment. 20 years, maybe. What if? Sundar said slowly. You could disappear just for one day. Modi looked at him, intrigued. I have an idea. Sundar said. And just like that, the seed of something wild and healing was planted. The next morning, at dawn before the city had woken up, a modest gray van pulled out of the Prime Minister's compound. No escorts, no flags, no press. Just the driver, one trusted aide, and two men in plain clothes. One of them wore a scarf over his face, a pair of sunglasses, and a cotton kurta. The other carried a small canvas backpack. They drove for hours, far beyond Delhi's limits, through dusty back roads into a quiet village surrounded by fields of mustard flowers and mango groves. As they stepped out of the van, Sundar turned to Modi Ji and said, Welcome to the middle of nowhere. Modi Ji blinked at the openness, the vastness, the shocking absence of noise. What is this place? He asked. A memory, Sundar replied. This is the village where my grandfather used to live. No one knows me here, and no one will recognize you either. They walked slowly through narrow lanes, past huts and hand pumps, the smell of firewood and spices lingering in the air. Children ran by without a second glance. Old men played cards under banyan trees. No one cared about politics. Here, no one asked questions. They reached a quiet hilltop just beyond the edge of the village. Sundar laid down a cotton sheet beneath a neem tree, pulled out 2 steel lunch boxes, and handed one to Modi Ji. Inside was lemon rice, mango pickle, and a small box of sweets. Modi Ji opened it. Stunned. This is what my mother used to pack for me during long train journeys. I know, Sundar said. I asked her. Modi looked at him, speechless. For the next hour, they ate, laughed, and shared stories of youth, of dreams, of fears no one had ever heard. They watched. The clouds drift slowly across the sky. There were no phones, no guards, no headlines. Just 2 men rediscovering what it meant to simply exist. But as the sun began to set, Sundar noticed something. A shadow. Then 2 figures moving down the path. At first, he thought it was nothing. But then he heard a voice. Sharp, impatient. They are. Modi's face tensed. Sundar stood quickly. The figures weren't villagers. They were from the press. Somehow, someone had leaked their location. Modi Ji stood, brushing off his kurta. The peaceful air vanished in an instant. And just as they started to walk down the hill to avoid confrontation, a drone buzzed overhead. It wasn't just a photo. It was about to become a headline. But then Sundar did something unexpected. He turned. Toward the drone, he stepped forward, and he raised his hand to throw something. Asterisk the drone. The defiance and the old man's orchard. Sundar's hand tightened around a small rock he'd picked up from the ground moments earlier. He didn't throw it out of anger. He threw it with purpose. It struck the side of the hovering drone with a sharp clink, sending it spiraling into the dry grass with a loud, awkward crash. The buzzing stopped. The silence that followed was thunderous. Sundar turned to Modi Ji, his face calm but eyes blazing. No more eyes. Not today. Modi Ji didn't speak. For a second, he simply stared at Sundar, his lifelong composed demeanor almost cracked wide open by the simple act of defiance. Here was one of the most powerful CEOs in the world, throwing rocks at a drone to protect a quiet moment between 2 human beings. It was absurd, and yet, somehow, deeply right. Down the slope, 2 journalists broke into a jog, cameras swinging at their sides. One of them shouted, "Prime Minister, just one question. Are you taking a secret trip with Google CEO? No." Comment, Sundar said, stepping in front of Modi Ji, voice low and steady. You have no idea what this moment means. Please, let him breathe. The reporters paused, uncertain. They hadn't expected that kind of pushback from Sundar Pichai, the man known for measured words and polished interviews. But there was something in his tone, calm yet commanding, that made them hesitate. Before they could regroup, a voice came from behind them, raspy but firm. Leave the hill, boys. This place is older than your questions. The reporters turned. An old man stood at the path's edge, leaning on a stick carved from a neem branch. His skin was dark and leathery, wrinkled like ancient bark, and his eyes held the stillness of someone who had seen too many summers to be impressed by suits or cameras. Who are you? One of the journalists asked. The old man stepped forward, his bare feet dusted with earth. This is my land. And that tree you're hiding under? My grandfather planted it. If you don't go now, the cows will find you. Cows? The younger reporter laughed. The old man gave a sharp whistle. Few seconds later, 3 large white bulls came lumbering up the path from the opposite side, eyes wide and nostrils flaring. Whether trained or just ornery, they charged toward the reporters with impressive speed. Yelling. The 2 journalists ran, stumbling over their equipment, dropping a tripod as they sprinted for the road. The old man cackled so hard he had to hold his ribs. Sundar turned to him with a half smile. "Thank you, Baba. You don't have to thank me," the old man said. "I recognize that man beside you. He's carried the country on his back long enough. If the world can't give him 5 minutes of silence, I'll give him 10. Modi ji stepped forward and placed a hand gently on the old man's shoulder. "Do you know who I am?" "Of course," the man replied, meeting his eyes. "But here, you are just another tired man under my tree. And tired men need fruit." He gestured toward the orchard beyond the hill, where guava and mango trees stood heavy with fruit. "Come, let's forget the world." The three men walked into the orchard, the late afternoon sun painting long shadows across the land. There, beneath an old guava tree, the old man pulled down a low-hanging branch, plucked 3 ripe fruits, and handed them out like sacred offerings. "Eat slowly," he said. "Guava doesn't forgive haste." As they sat and ate, the mood softened. The guava was tart and sweet, its juices sticky on their fingers, its seeds getting stuck between their teeth. And yet, it felt like communion, an act older than any summit. Older than any news cycle. Modi ji leaned back against the tree trunk and looked at the sky. "I haven't felt this alive in years," he murmured. Sundar turned to him. "Maybe it's time to redefine what power means." "How so?" "Not being surrounded by hundreds of people who nod when you speak, but being around 1 or 2 who make you feel heard when you don't say a word." Modi ji nodded slowly. "I envy you sometimes, Sundar. You left, built a life far away, and came back with perspective. I stayed, and in staying ... I may have lost pieces of myself." Sundar shook his head. "You didn't lose them. You buried them under duty. And now, maybe it's time to dig." They spent the rest of the day in the orchard listening to the old man's stories, tales of monsoons, of lost loves, of village boys who ran away to Mumbai and never came back. Every word felt like a gentle wind clearing away the dust that had settled on Modi ji's soul. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with orange and violet, the old man stood up and said, "You've eaten my fruit, rested under my tree, and laughed with my stories. That makes you family. But family must leave before night, or they turn into dreams." They nodded, understanding the poetry. On the ride back to the city, Modi ji was quiet, but it wasn't the silence of exhaustion or pressure. It was a peaceful silence like the kind that comes when you finally exhale after holding your breath for too long. Sundar looked out the window, watching the villages blur into towns, and the towns into highways, thinking about how close the world had come to losing a man, not to death, but to invisibility. Leaders like Modi ji were always surrounded by people, but few truly saw them. Fewer still dared to tell them the truth they didn't want to hear. As the city lights of Delhi appeared in the distance, Modi ji turned to Sundar. "Thank you," he said. "Not for what you did, but for who you were." Sundar nodded. "Thank me when you do something for yourself." Modi ji smiled faintly. "Perhaps I already have." When they returned to the residence, the staff was on high alert. The leaked drone footage had gone viral. The headlines were wild with speculation, some accusing Modi ji of evading national responsibilities, others speculating on backdoor deals with Silicon Valley. The media frenzy was in full storm, but something was different. Modi ji didn't react with his usual control. He didn't summon his media team. He didn't draft a clarification. Instead, he walked into his private study, called in his secretary, and said, "Cancel the next 3 events. I need to write something." "Sir?" The secretary blinked. "Just trust me." An hour later, he handed Sundar a letter. It wasn't for the press. It wasn't for the government. It was for India. A handwritten letter scanned and posted online titled, "A Pause Worth More Than Power." In it, he wrote about exhaustion, the loneliness of leadership, and the sacred value of simplicity. He didn't reveal the village or the orchard or the old man, but he spoke of how a short moment away from Noise reminded him of his purpose not to rule but to serve, not to command but to listen, not to be honored, but to remain human. The letter went viral. Not because it was clever. But because it was honest. Meanwhile, the drone footage that had caused the frenzy, it was taken down. Not by the government. But by the reporter himself. He posted a message. For the first time in my career, I felt ashamed. Sometimes silence deserves protection. As the country buzzed with conversations about leadership, vulnerability, and talents, Sundar received a quiet message from Modi ji the next morning. Come to the study. I want to show you something. Sundar walked in and found Modi ji holding a dusty, sealed box. He opened it slowly, revealing an old photograph of his father beside a chai stall. But beneath it, was a letter, folded tightly. Unopened. Double quotes. I wrote this the night before I first ran for public office, Modi said. I told myself I'd read it again if I ever forgot who I was. And have you? Sundar asked. Modi looked down. Yes. He handed the letter to Sundar. Read it aloud. Remind me. Sundar unfolded the letter, cleared his throat, and began to read. But as he reached the third line, he paused. His eyes widened. Modi ji. Double quotes. He whispered. Double quotes. Yes. Did you know? This line here. This is written in your father's handwriting, not yours. Modi's brow furrowed. He took the letter, examined it carefully, and his expression changed. He must have rewritten my words when I wasn't looking. But then Sundar spotted something else. A code. Hidden in the corner. A symbol scribbled faintly. Not just a message. Clue. A trail to something Modi ji never knew his father left behind. You might want to sit down, Sundar said slowly, because this changes everything. Asterisk, the secret his father left behind study, grew still, as Sundar and Modi ji stared at the faded letter. The flickering lamplight cast long shadows across the wooden floor, and the only sound was the quiet hum of the air. Conditioner? The room, once filled with polished furniture and tidy bookshelves, now felt like a time machine. The letter trembled lightly in Modi ji's hands, not from fear, but from something deeper. The trembling that comes when a long-closed door creaks open inside you, when memory and mystery suddenly collide. What is it? Modi asked again, this time not as a prime minister, but as a son searching for the echo of a father's voice. Sundar leaned in, pointing to the bottom right corner of the page. Just above a smudged ink mark, barely visible to the naked eye, was a tiny symbol one that looked like a curled tea leaf with a dot inside. Sundar's voice was soft, measured. I have seen this symbol before. When I was younger, during a university trip to Gujarat, we visited an old literature museum. In a glass case, there was a collection of secret letters exchanged between freedom fighters during British rule. Many of them used this symbol as a kind of marker. It meant not all that is written is meant to be read, some is meant to be followed. Modi's eyes narrowed, his breath catching in his throat. You're saying this letter was a clue? Not just a clue, Sundar replied. A map, or at least a beginning of one. They stared at the letter again. The phrase Modi ji had written decades ago read, I will rise early tomorrow, for the future does not wait. It hides in the corners of today. The phrase had always seemed poetic, now it felt precise. A code hidden in plain sight. Do you remember where you wrote this? Sundar asked. Modi ji closed his eyes, trying to rewind the years. Vadnagar, my childhood home. The one behind the temple near the railway track. Does it still stand? Modi hesitated. Mostly. It's now part of a heritage site, preserved like a museum. They kept everything just the way it was when I left. Then that's where we go next, Sundar said. We. Sundar smiled. You think I'm letting you go alone? Modi ji didn't argue. This time, he was grateful. 2 days later, under strict secrecy, Modi ji and Sundar boarded a government helicopter disguised under a routine air patrol mission. They landed on the outskirts of Vadnagar at dawn, when the streets were still. Wrapped in morning fog, The town stirred slowly, its rhythm unchanged by decades of national progress. Children walked barefoot with school bags. Temple bells chimed softly, and old women lit incense on doorsteps. They moved carefully, dressed in simple clothing, walking like old friends returning to their roots. When they reached Modi's childhood home, it was exactly as he remembered: narrow stone step, a small wooden door with rusted hinges, and walls that bore the stories of 1,000 monsoons. A caretaker, unaware of their true identity, welcomed them kindly. "You boys come for history?" he asked with a toothy grin. "Something like that," Modi Ji replied. They stepped inside. The air was thick with dust and incense. The walls were lined with old photographs, utensils, and folded blankets. In the far corner, beside a broken shelf, sat a small wooden box. Modi's eyes locked onto it instantly. "That's my father's," he whispered. He knelt beside it, fingers trembling as he opened the lid. Inside were neatly arranged items: an old tea strainer, a worn-out wristwatch, a few coins wrapped in cloth, and a journal. He lifted the journal carefully. "I remember this," he said. "He used to write in it late at night, after all of us had gone to sleep. I once asked him what he wrote. He said, 'Dreams too heavy for a boy to carry.'" Sundar sat beside him. "Maybe today you're strong enough to carry them." They opened the journal. Most of the pages were filled with notes on tea sales, town gossip, and prayers. But near the back was a folded page stitched into the binding. Sundar gently pulled at the thread, revealing a second letter. The paper was yellowed and fragile, but the writing was bold. "To the one who dares to dream beyond the stall, if you have found this, then you're seeking more than power. You are seeking truth. The world will give you 1,000 voices. Learn to recognize your own. There is a box buried beneath the neem tree behind the railway tracks. You and I planted that tree when you were 9. You cried because the soil scratched your fingers. But I told you what you plant with pain grows with pride. Go there. Open it. And remember, you are more than a prime minister. You are my son." Modi's lips quivered. Tears welled in his eyes, but he blinked them back. There was no space for pride now. Only the overwhelming sense of being seen, not by millions, but by one man who had died decades ago, and yet still found a way to guide him. They stood, left the house, and walked toward the railway tracks. The station buzzed with early commuters, chaiwalas calling out prices, boys dragging luggage carts. But just beyond the platform, near a rusted fence and an overgrown patch of earth, stood a neem tree, older, broader, and still vibrant. They found the exact spot described in the letter. Modi knelt, his fingers brushing aside the dry leaves. Sundar helped clear the soil. A few inches deep, their hands struck something hard. A metal box. They pulled it out slowly. It was dented, wrapped in an old plastic cloth, and sealed with a copper latch. Modi opened it. Inside were 3 items. A black and white photograph of young Modi and his father holding a tea kettle. A single 5-rupee coin, shining as if polished recently. And a notebook. Modi opened the notebook, expecting more. Journal entries. Instead, what he saw stunned him. Plans. Detailed sketches of village electrification projects. Notes about mobile banking ideas. Concepts for literacy through street theater. It wasn't just a notebook. It was a vision. Decades before Modi entered politics, his father, an uneducated tea seller, had been dreaming of the same future Modi now fought to build. In his own way, the man had seen what India could be. His dreams had no stage, no spotlight, but they burned bright nonetheless. Sundar flipped through the pages, amazed. "This is incredible," he whispered. "Your father was designing social reform programs before he even knew what they were called." Modi clutched the notebook to his chest. He always said, "We may not have the tools, but we can leave behind the blueprint." The wind picked up, rustling the pages. And then, at the very back, another surprise. A name. Written in bold ink. "Sundar Pichai, the one I serve tea to every week." Sundar froze. "That's my grandfather." Modi looked at him in disbelief. "My father never told me, but they knew each other." "Not just knew. Sundar said, his voice shaking. They dreamed together. The weight of that revelation struck them both. Two men, decades ago, sitting on the edge of a railway platform, one selling tea, the other buying and sharing quiet conversations that planted seeds. Now, years later, their grandsons stood side by side, connected not just by title, but by lineage of purpose. This, Sundar whispered, was never an accident. Modi closed the notebook, tears finally falling down his cheeks. Maybe we were never building a future, he said softly. Maybe we were just uncovering the one they already started. They sat under the neem tree until nightfall, no longer rushed, no longer distracted. The stars blinked to life one by one, as if to bear witness. And then, just as they prepared to leave, a call came through. Urgent. From the National Security Council. Modi took the phone. Listened silently. When he hung up, his face was grave. There's been an attack, he said. Cyber breach. Critical infrastructure. They need immediate action. Sundar's face hardened. How bad? Enough to bring the country to its knees if we don't act. He paused. Then looked at Sundar. You ready? Sundar didn't hesitate. Always. They stood up, notebook in hand. But as they turned to leave, the tree creaked softly in the wind, as if whispering, "Go on, boys." The roots are strong. Asterisk FAARELOS. And fathers be the time they returned to Delhi. The city had already changed. It wasn't visible in the streets or the skyline. The air hadn't thickened, and the lights still glittered like they always did. But something underneath was shifting. The government's digital command center, a massive subterranean facility beneath the National Informatics Hub, was alive. With alarms, screens blinked red, analysts scrambled between terminals, and maps across India's infrastructure lit up with threatening pulses. Modi ji and Sundar were greeted not with ceremony, but with urgency. No handshakes, no press. Only eyes that asked for answers. What's the situation? Modi demanded as he entered the war room, his voice cutting through the noise like a blade, a senior official. Eyes bloodshot from hours without sleep. Stepped forward. Sir, we're dealing with a coordinated cyberattack. Multiple vectors. The power grid in 3 states is under pressure. Banking firewalls are being tested every minute. And worst of all, there's chatter that the data cores at the IMS. Hospital system may have been breached. Modi's jaw clenched. What's the motive? Unknown, but it's surgical. Someone wants to trigger instability. Not just technically, but socially. They want panic. Sundar stepped forward, scanning the live feeds. Rows of code, firewall pings, breach attempts. All too familiar. This is not a script kiddie stunt. This is methodical. Nation-state level. Someone studied your systems for months, maybe years. And they picked the perfect time, Modi muttered bitterly. Right when I disappeared for a few days. But Sundar shook his head. Maybe that break saved you. Cleared your head. And gave us this. He held up the notebook. A reminder that India has always been built on resilience. Now it's time to prove it. Without waiting, Sundar pulled up a keyboard and began to work alongside the top cybersecurity team. He moved like a conductor among chaos, reading packet logs, tracing server origins, isolating malware signatures. Slowly, a pattern began to emerge. This code ... double quotes, he whispered. I've seen it before. Where? Modi asked. It's modified, but the structure is similar to something our Google security teams identified last year. A ghost architecture used by a rogue group of ex-military tech agents. The last time we traced them, they were working under contract for unknown clients. Mercenaries? Modi asked. More like digital warlords? Sundar replied. Suddenly. A system alert flash. Unauthorized access. Delhi Metro control grid. They're targeting the metro. An analyst shouted. They could override train signals, disable emergency brakes. Evacuate the network, Modi commanded. Shut it down section by section. Sir, that could cause a stampede. Better chaos on the ground than tragedy in the tunnels. Modi said coldly. As the team followed orders. Sundar was already 2 steps ahead. We need a counter-intrusion, he said. Not just defense. We trace them back. Infect their nodes with a time-based shutdown protocol. Is that even legal? A junior official asked. Modi didn't blink. When lives are at stake, the law becomes the line between chaos and order. They worked for hours. Sweat forming on brows, fingers blistering from constant typing, tension thick as iron. And just as the night turned to morning, something shifted. The breaches began to slow. FIRELLs stabilized. The IAMS hospital database was restored with minimal loss, and the metro halted safely before anyone got hurt. The war room erupted in applause, but Sundar didn't celebrate. He was staring at one screen where a line of code kept blinking, a silent message left by the attackers before their systems collapsed. You may have protected the machine, but the soul is next. He frowned. They're not done. Modi walked over, reading the message. What do you think it means? Sundar replied quietly. They weren't just trying to crash systems. They were testing the human reaction, measuring fear, gathering behavioral data. Modi's face darkened. Then the next attack won't be digital. It'll be personal. As if on cue, a call came through from the central press office. A viral video was spreading online. Modi ji, alone, sitting beneath a neem tree. A close-up of his tired face. A voiceover saying he had abandoned his post while the country suffered. They're weaponizing your vulnerability, Sundar whispered, turning healing into weakness, but Modi didn't flinch. Not this time. Let them, he said, because for the first time in my life, I have nothing to hide. And then he stood. He walked to the camera set up in the corner of the room. Turn it on, he told his secretary. Sir, I'll speak now, not as a prime minister, but as a son. They recorded his message in one take. He spoke not of retaliation, but of reflection, not of power, but of purpose. He acknowledged the attack, praised the teams who defended India, and then he held up the notebook. This, he said, was written by a man who never went to college, who never sat in a boardroom, but whose dreams built the roads we walk on today. He was my father, and he taught me that leadership is not about avoiding exhaustion. It's about acknowledging it and then rising anyway. The video, once posted, shattered every record. Millions watched. And in the comments, something rare happened. Silence. Not trolls. Not anger. Just silence, because the message had cut too deep. Even the attackers, wherever they were, must have paused. Later that day, Sundar stood beside Modi ji on the terrace of the Prime Minister's residence. Below them, the city moved on. Trains resumed. Hospitals rebooted. Banks restored. But there was something different in the wind. A strange, electric quiet. You realize what just happened? Sundar asked. Modi turned to him. India didn't just survive a cyber war. Sundar continued. She remembered her soul. Modi said nothing. He simply placed a hand on Sundar's shoulder. What now? Sundar asked. Now, Modi said slowly, we honor the ones who saw the future before we could. Your father? Sundar asked. Modi nodded. Double quotes and yours, he said, looking at Sundar. Do you remember that one conversation they had, the tea stall? The talk of literacy, the dream to put books in every child's hands? Yes, Sundar whispered. My grandfather told me once. He said your father wanted to build a library with no doors, where the poor could walk in and walk out powerful. Modi stepped away, looked into the sky, then smiled. Then let's build it. What? A national library. Not just a building. An open access learning hub in every rural town. Digital, physical, global, we'll call it Padhega India. Sundar's heart stirred. And we'll fund it. How? Modi grinned. We won't fund it. We'll invite the country to do it. 1 rupee at a time. Just like our fathers dreamed. A call buzzed on Sundar's phone. He ignored it. Let's do it, he said. Let's light up the corners. And just as they shook hands, a loud bang echoed in the courtyard below. Followed by a scream. They rushed down the stairs. Security. sprinting from all sides. There, in the middle of the marble walkway, stood a young boy, no more than 12, shaking, holding a small folded paper in one hand, and a fake gun in the other. What's going on? Sundar asked gently, kneeling. And, boy looked terrified. They told me to do it to scare you. Said they'd give my mother medicine if I did. Modi knelt beside him. Who are they? The boy looked up, and then said the name that neither of them expected. A name they hadn't heard in years, Name buried in their past, a man both Sundar and Modi had trusted once. Long ago. And who now? Wanted revenge, Modi, single quotes, eyes darkened. This, isn't over. Asterisk a promise carved in stone, a courtyard, had fallen eerily silent. Sundar Pichai stood frozen, the boy's words still echoing in his mind. Beside him, Modi Ji's face had turned, pale not from fear, but from something far deeper. Betrayal. Asterisk. The name the boy had spoken, Pravan Malhotra, wasn't just a ghost from their past. He was once a trusted friend. A visionary technocrat who had risen through India's digital revolution during its earliest days. Modi Ji had worked alongside him during grassroots campaigns, while Sundar had crossed paths with him during collaborative research ventures in Bangalore. But Pravan had disappeared nearly a decade ago, after being ousted from a major government contract under allegations of data manipulation and political espionage. The case had never gone public, buried quietly to avoid scandal. But both Sundar and Modi remembered the fury in Pravin's eyes when he walked out of that final meeting. You silenced me, he had said then. But I'll teach you both. That data is louder than words. And now it seemed he was back, using fear, desperation, and broken systems to rewrite the future, his way. The boy clutched the paper in his hand, sobbing quietly. They found us in the slum, he whispered. Said my mother would die without insulin. They gave me the gun, it's plastic. They said no one would get hurt. Just scare you. Send a message. Modi knelt down, his hand gently resting on the boy's shoulder. What's your name, Beta? Ayesh. And your mother? Meena. Modi looked at Sundar. We need to find them. Protect them. And then we find him. That evening, Modi and Sundar launched a quiet operation. No headlines, no declarations. Just intention and precision. While intelligence teams began tracing Pravin's digital fingerprints, Sundar initiated an independent audit through Google's Global Threat Analytics division. Hundreds of anonymous nodes, encrypted networks, and ghost servers were pinged and mapped. And through it all, a trail began to form. Pravan wasn't hiding. He was waiting, and he had left them a door, a server. Just barely exposed at the edge of the dark web, when Sundar accessed it. He found one file, a video, they watched it together in Modi's private study. Praven appeared on screen. Older now, with streaks of gray and eyes filled with icy calm. Hello, old friends, he began. Don't worry, the boy is safe. I don't hurt children. I just use them like you both use the poor to write speeches about change. You abandoned me when I spoke the truth. Now I will show India a new truth. He leaned closer into the camera. Tomorrow at noon you will both be exposed. Every conversation, every message, every whisper between governments and corporations. Transparency, remember? He used to champion that word. I'm going to hand it back to you, with a sword attached. The screen went black. For a moment, neither Sundar nor Modi spoke. Then, quietly, Modi said, he's not after revenge. He's after relevance. Sundar nodded. He thinks if he burns the system down, the ashes will skull his name. Then, we don't fight him with fire, Modi said. We fight him with light. The next morning at 9 a.m. Modi Ji made a surprise appearance at the Bharat Connect Forum, an annual summit focused on innovation and transparency. It wasn't on the official schedule. There were no press releases, but the auditorium was packed, and beside him, to everyone's shock, stood Sundar Pichai. They walked on stage together, no security, no barriers, just two men calm, clear. Something unseen, Modi Ji spoke first. Before noon arrives, before the threats become reality, I want to speak directly to the nation. I want to tell you a story, not of politics, but of people. He told them about the boy in the courtyard, dot about the orchard, dot about the old man with the bulls, about the tea stall where his father and Sundar's grandfather planted dreams like seeds no one thought would grow. We were taught, he said, that if you serve chai with sincerity, you earn trust. Not everyone who drinks your tea will remember your name, but they'll remember the warmth. India is that warmth. He paused. Someone wants to take that away. To convince us that trust is weakness, that truth can be manipulated, that systems are either perfect or corrupt. Then he lifted the notebook. This, he said, is proof that hope doesn't start in glass buildings or war rooms. It starts with ink and dreams and broken fingers pushing seeds into dry earth. And then Sundar stepped forward. Transparency, he said, isn't about exposing secrets. It's about revealing the heart, and our heart is not perfect. But it is honest, and it's learning every single day. He raised a small device. This, he said, is what Praven wants to hijack, a server key that links to the nation's primary data reserve. He thinks he'll use it to publish everything we've done. He turned it over, but he doesn't realize we've already opened it. The screen behind them lit up. On it appeared a real-time display of the National Data Index, a secure, encrypted log of communications, transactions, and operational strategies filtered by level and sensitivity, Sundar continued. For the past 48 hours, we've reviewed every line of code, every call log, every administrative note, and we've shared it with India's top citizen ethics panel. The camera panned to a row of individuals, teachers, doctors, engineers, farmers, and one chai WL. Modi ji smiled. The soul of India is not in its leaders, it's in its people. And then he said, quietly but clearly, Praven, I know you're watching. Your file is open, your server traced, and your data, is exposed. A final screen flickered on, revealing Praven's offshore accounts, manipulation records, and a string of messages linking him to international data crime syndicates. Audience gasped. But Sundar stepped in, his voice calm. We're not arresting you yet. We're offering you something rare. Modi ji nodded. A chance to be better. To return. To plant something new. If you want it. The feed ended. And across the country, for the first time in days, people didn't shout. Didn't tweet with rage. They paused. And they listened. A week later, Ayush and his mother were relocated to a safe home in Pune. The boy had begun school thanks to a scholarship arranged by Sundar. He started writing poetry about trees, stars, and sometimes about a man who knelt beside him and made him feel safe. The Padhega India movement launched with over 10 million rupees in donations in the first 48 hours. Schools began transforming. Abandoned community halls into reading hubs. Technology volunteers helped connect rural children with live online classes. One girl from Bihar said, books used to be for the lucky. Now they're for the willing. Modi ji returned to work with a different energy, not louder, but lighter. He took evening walks. He read letters sent by children. He smiled more. And Sundar, he returned to California briefly. But one evening he looked at the golden hills outside his window, then turned to his assistant and said, book me a ticket to Delhi. Again, sir? No, he said. This time, home. Weeks later. The two men met again beneath that neem tree in Via DNA. GAR. Not for strategy. Not for speeches. Just to sit. And as the sun set, Sundar reached into his bag. He pulled out something wrapped in cloth. A small carved stone plaque. Modi ji took it in his hands. It read, for those who planted seeds with no promise of shade, your dreams did not die. They bloomed. And below it, two names. Damodar's Modi Shyam, Sundar Paikaith. Two men stood side by side, pressing the plaque gently. Into the earth. No cameras. No ceremony. Just silence. A sacred silence. And from that silence grew something eternal. Asterisk.